little children, let us love one another. There's a legend of the Apostle John. That, of course, the Apostle John, as tradition is that he was the last living of the 12 apostles. That all the other apostles had been martyred and he was still alive. He was the last one to die. So, of course, being the last living apostle, many people would come to hear him preach. Because also he had written a gospel, the gospel according to John, and a few letters, and the mysterious book of Revelation. Eloquently spoke of the beauty of God and of Christ. And being the last living apostle, people would come up from all over to hear him preach. But towards the end of his life, his sermons began to get shorter and shorter. Which I know people wish a similar thing for me, but towards the end of his life, he began simply to say the phrase. People would come and say, "John, give us a word." And we're waiting for this eloquent sermon, and he would say, "My little children, let us love one another." Anything else? "John, give us another word." He would say more emphatically, "My little children, let us love one another." He would just repeat that. And it's not because John ran out of things to say, but that in his life of reflection, of meditating on Christ, he saw at the heart of the gospel was this very idea of love, sort of as we hear in the gospel today. Everything that our faith teaches, all of Christianity, is oriented towards love God, everything I am, my heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love my neighbor. Little children, let us love one another. Now, it can be easy for us to sort of write off love as this fluffy thing, or that's nice of John to say. It's worth remembering that John himself did not live an easy life. First of all, he originally spent his career as a hard-working fisherman, pulling in big nets and so on and so forth, and then left everything to go follow Jesus, sort of roughing it with Jesus. Watched Jesus get crucified. Was one of the only apostles who stood at the foot of the cross as Jesus was dying. And then he watched his 11 closest friends, the other 11 apostles, all get martyred, beginning with his very own brother, the first of the apostles to get martyred. And during his life, he himself was then exiled from his home banished to an island where they sent criminals to be banished, and had to live life there in exile from everyone else he knew and loved. Thus, one you would expect had every reason, perhaps, to be resentful and bitter. And yet, wasn't. What was his secret? He knew the one who is love. He's the one who writes to us that God is love. Not just that God is loving or God has love, but God himself is love. That he knew the face of Christ, the face of love. That he stood at the foot of the cross as Christ poured himself out in love. That he sought to behold the face of love. The face of God, which ultimately is what we're made for. The Bible talks about this phrase of seeking the face of the Lord, to know God, to see his face. Though to behold the face of God, fully and totally and completely, is both a terrifying thing and a beautiful thing. Because when we stand in the gaze of God, totally, completely, entirely, and are aware of that, it's terrifying because we're most fully convicted of all the things we've done wrong, all of our sins, all of our failures, all of our shortcomings, all of our wrongdoings. On that day when we behold his face fully, we'll be painfully aware of that. And yet, at the exact same time, we'll know the depths of his love for us. That he sees totally and completely every single sin and failure, and yet chooses us. God's love for us is this fierce tenderness. To behold the face of God. There's a book that I appreciate, that I love a lot, by one of my favorite writers, C.S. Lewis, who I've referenced before. It's a book titled Till We Have Faces, and it's a retelling of a Greek myth. It's the story of a woman. She's writing her story. We'll just shut this off and I'll talk extra loud. She's writing her story about that she had lost her sister. And she begins writing that she's writing her case against the gods, because it's a Greek myth. And she begins writing her story saying, no answer. And she's angry she had lost her sister, and she's building a case against the gods, and she cries out angrily, there's no answer from them. And then she goes and tells her story. And throughout the story of the book, she eventually, towards the end of the book, she has a dream, a vision. She's standing before the gods. She has her book that she's written, and she presents her case to the gods. And as she's presenting her case to the gods, her book shrinks down to just a page with a few lines on it. And it's just a few lines of her anger and resentment and bitterness that she just repeats over and over. And she realizes in that moment that then her anger at the gods that she built over the loss of her sister, she had in the name of love, she began to realize really wasn't so much love, but this possessive selfishness and this bitterness and resentment that she had wrapped her life around. And that finally begins to unravel. And eventually she has a moment where she then beholds the face of the God of gods behind it all. Where she has that very conviction of this fierce tenderness of this God, who sees all of her hurt, all of her resentment, and pierces her with this deep love. And at the end of the book, she then writes, I began this book writing no answer. But now I realize, O Lord, why you utter no answer. Because you yourself are the answer. Before your face, all questions die away. What other answer would suffice? To behold, to look on the God who is love. To know him. That is what we were made for. To know this God who is love, who loves us with a fierce tenderness. A love that convicts us, but transforms us. That loves us even in spite of our sins. That will seek us out. That pours himself out in love for us. There's another legend of the Apostle John about a young man who he was discipling and teaching, who then went on his way and fell in with a band of thieves and murderers and became one of them and even became a leader among them. And as soon as the Apostle John heard how this spiritual son of his has strayed, he ran to go find him, knowing full well that they might arrest him and kill him before he even got to see this young man. And yet he went to him and seeks him out, and even says, even if I die, I would still seek you out. That my death may show the depth of my love for you. And as the Apostle John reveals to us through his life, through his teaching, this God who is love pours himself out for us in love on the cross, who continues to seek us. At the end of all things, it boils down to love. The meaning of life, to be loved, to love. To know this God who is love. So that's the word I want to leave with you, just as the Apostle John left a final word with his disciples. Little children, let us love one another. But a love that flows forth from the very heart of God. That we encounter here at this altar, that when we receive the Eucharist, it's beating Sacred Heart that pulsates forth, that ripples forth into the world, through us and into the world, that we carry this divine love. Not just my own love, not my selfish, broken love that's wrapped around selfishness and resentment, but to behold his face, to receive his heart, to know this one who is love, to seek the face of him who is love. So my little children, let us love one another.